Okay, welcome to the
Did you close it off like blue?
forum for our election in 2009.
Thank you, Matt.
We have some music in the background, which will quiet down. I want to thank first all three candidates for running clean, honest campaigns, and I know you'll keep it up through now the election, and also for being willing to step up and run and to serve on the council and to really give back to our village that way. It's a tremendous responsibility and a tremendous budget to manage and a lot of issues, and thank you. Thank you for stepping up, all three of you. I want to thank all the members of the election committee who are here. Please raise your hand, election committee members. You guys are terrific, and boy, are we going to work hard the next 2 weeks. Haley Silver is going to be our MC today. Lauren Beal is our timekeeper. We are going to be excruciatingly even-handed and giving everybody 3 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes for each candidate to answer a question. You'll have 3 minutes for a closing statement. And if, God forbid, there's any kind of personal incivility, the candidate who is thus attacked will have 1 minute for a civil rebuttal. We do not believe that will be necessary, but just know we have provided for it. We expect nothing but the best from you three.
So you're not allowing for a criminal rebuttal?
And I should tell you right now that Lauren is a very stern and strict timekeeper. She has that mom thing down pat. And I would ask you to respect it when her beeper goes off. That means really wrap it up.
Okay.
We have 3x5 cards here and pens if you would like to write your question. You have a question ready? Just pass it forward.
And a pen.
And your pen. Thank you for returning the pen.
Your pen.
Haley, here you go. And thank you for being here. This is, local government is important. And I want to again thank the candidates. I want to thank the committee. And I want to especially thank our staff. Matt and Tina, thank you very much for everything you do to facilitate all the logistics of running an honest, clean, fair election in our little village. With that, let us begin. Haley, 3 minutes for opening statement.
Great. Great. Well, I'm happy to be here to do this today and to be led by Marty on our committee. We've had a very strong committee. So with that, we will turn it over to the candidates for 3 minutes opening statements, starting with Katya.
Okay, I'll move it a little
Sure.
this way. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out to hear the candidates speak. And thank you to the Elections Committee for organizing this event. I think it's very important to have the community engaged. And we have a very cohesive community because we are engaged. So it's just wonderful to see the good outcome. I've served on the council for 4 years now. And
Can you push the microphone closer to her? Sure. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've served on the council for the last 4 years, and in those 4 years, the council has accomplished a lot. In no small part due to Richard's great leadership abilities as the chairman. We have completed the long-stalled street projects. Street were repaved after many years of being in a significant amount of disrepair. New office staff was hired, the wonderful Matt and the wonderful Tina, that have really helped bring the community back together after where it was 4 years ago. And we've completed the long-stalled streetlights project, which was stuck for 9 years before I joined the council 4 years ago, and now they're all installed and our streets are much better lit, and that's a wonderful thing to see. Personally, on the council, I've undertaken leading the lights project. I thought it was a very important thing to actually finish it, so I'm proud of that. As soon as I joined the council, I also started the yearly community survey that comes out in September. And we really take the feedback that we receive from residents seriously, and it helps us make informed decisions throughout the year following the survey. So I'd like to thank all of you for actually responding to those surveys. And lastly, leaf vacuuming was another thing that I spearheaded since I joined the council. Looking ahead, I'd like, if elected, to complete the projects that are already underway, been mostly completed. So the streetlights, for instance, even though they're all installed now, we have a clear view of what the dark spots are. And in those spots, we need to put in new light poles to make sure that the streets are evenly lit. Walkability study is something we'd like to undertake, so looking at the whole village holistically to ensure that our streets are safe for pedestrians and for children, and taking recommendations from that to how we can address to make the village even better in terms of walkability. And not least, the 5G issue, which is an important issue, and the council has passed an ordinance a couple of months ago that's put us in a strong position to address any developments in that space. So we've enabled ourselves to study this further and make adjustments as we learn more about this issue. Thank you.
Thanks. And
Okay.
maybe I'll give a 30-second warning going forward, at least in the opening statements. I'm sorry for that, but I think for the 2-minute responses, it's 2 minutes. I won't give you a 1 minute.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for being here. Thank you to the election committee. I really appreciate the presence of so many residents here. I think it's really important for the residents to participate in watching what's going on in the village and participating in it, so I really appreciate the turnout. There's much that's happened in the village over the last 4 years that I think is very positive. The village management has become more professional, and services to residents have clearly improved. And that is all to the good, and I congratulate the current council members on their achievements in this area. At the same time, I'm a newcomer, and I think that there should be room for new ideas, and that's hopefully the role that I'll play in this debate. So let me touch on a few issues that have come to my mind as I've thought about the village. The first issue that I think is really important is that the community or the village begin a process of improving communications between the council and the village residents. I think that there clearly are some opportunities, but many issues I think come up very briefly before the council. There's limited opportunity for residents to really get to know an issue, to really come to understand it, to understand the costs and benefits on both sides of various activities, various options, and I think that should be expanded, and there should be opportunities outside of the context of a council meeting for people to really express and discuss their views on the issues that come up. And for example, I think that there are two issues that are before the village now. One is the 5G issue that Katya mentioned, which is a telecommunications issue. It's a complex issue. It's one that I think can have a significant impact on the community, and I think that there should be a real opportunity for people to begin to understand what's at stake, what our options are, and to begin to decide what their preferences are. Second issue that's coming before the village in one way or another is the issue of accessory dwelling units that's now being debated by the Montgomery County Council. And if that is indeed passed, this will have a major impact on our community, I believe, and as a result, we really need an opportunity to really understand and debate and begin to really reach some kind of consensus on how we...
Sorry. 10 seconds.
10 seconds?
10 seconds.
Oh my God, okay.
Sorry.
Let me mention a couple...
Starting now.
Okay, thank you. Let me mention a couple of other issues. Safety, in particular traffic and pedestrian safety. The mini crime wave that we've been experiencing recently, I think these are issues that have to be addressed. Third, I think that there is the regulatory process within the community, within the village, should be improved, both with respect to construction, with respect to 5G and other issues.
Time.
And that's my time. So we'll talk about these through the rest of the meeting.
I want to thank you, Marty, and all the members of the election committee. You have been preparing for the election since January, and I commend your efforts and the efforts of all of the committees. Our village relies on volunteers, and the council and I are grateful that those who volunteer to make the village a better place. I am also grateful for those of you who are here today. I want to believe that residents are satisfied with what the council has and is doing for our village safety, livability, and encouraging neighborliness. Over the past 4 years, I feel that I've been a part of an active council that has made progress in both street work, and the reason I can't see my notes is I don't have my glasses on, street work, and thanks to the dauntless efforts of Katya, completion of our long-stalled streetlights. As Katya and I said in our flyer, which we hope you've received, since our review of street dark areas, we can now fill in additional streetlights where needed. While major projects, streetlights, and repaving are obvious, what is less obvious are the hours the council spends with issues that arise on a day-to-day basis, building code meetings, variance requests, and a council attendee at all committee meetings, to name a few. We are not, however, planning to rest on our laurels. The council is about to initiate a walkability study to make the village safer for children and all pedestrians. We will continue to work with the state and county council members and leaders of other villages to control what the telecom companies can do and not do if installation takes place of 5G in the village proper. And as a result of the robbery at Brookville Pharmacy, we've met with our police officers, excuse me, and will continue to discuss with them effective police presence in our village. And finally, we will continue to work with the village residents to assist the Community Engagement Committee, which has done a great job, including the lovely reception at Sally Van Tassel's last night. These residents have really added to the community. Thanks also to Keith Allen and, of course, Matt, who, unfortunately for us, will soon be leaving. And thanks to Tina, who has put in many extra hours and will be continuing with the village. I hope you are persuaded that we have a council that works. I would be grateful to be re-elected and to be part of a council that makes our village special. Thank you.
Okay, great. We will start with the questions.
Okay.
Everyone will have a 2-minute opportunity to respond. The first one is as follows. As a resident of Cummings Lane, traffic and parking is an issue. Other local jurisdictions have done a better job clearly marking parking spaces and controlling traffic with larger speed bumps and do not enter at certain times of day signs. How would you address this concern? We'll start with Richard and go this way.
We've probably had this about 10 times of where we've looked at Cummings Lane. We've tried putting up speed monitors. We've talked about having police there, but anything that we do with Cummings Lane will more likely just shift all of the traffic to Shepherd. And so we've been concerned about that. We've talked about a one-way, making Cummings one way and Shepherd one way the other way, as a way of helping, making it less convenient, at least for some people, and to deter some traffic. It isn't possible to say local traffic only, because the enforcement of it is just very, very difficult. And again, we've talked about speed bumps with our traffic engineer. I feel like our speed bumps aren't as high as other areas, and I think we should be addressing that. Done.
Great. Peter.
Okay. Well, this is an issue that I've heard about from many residents. People are really concerned about this issue, not just on Cummings, but in the north end of the village as well. There's traffic coming through on Thornapple. And we really have not come up with a perfect solution to this problem. Certainly speed bumps and higher speed bumps than currently exist is an option. Painting areas of the sidewalk where no parking is permitted is one possibility, but that, of course, risks decreasing the amount of parking that's available. There could also be speed monitors in the the cameras that take pictures and issue tickets, and then particularly for people who are coming through who don't really regard this as their community. I think that may be an effective solution. And I think that this is, I think it's very positive that there's this walkability study. I think getting some professional opinions on what our options are, I think will be desirable. But it's a hard problem to solve given the limited amount of space, the traffic in both directions, the need for pedestrians and cars to both be using the same streets. I think it's a hard problem to solve, and we'll see what our options are.
Gotcha.
Thank you. So I completely agree with what Richard and Peter have said. It is not an easy problem to solve, and it is something that we continue to look at on the council every year. So this past year we've had a study done on the average speed of various streets throughout the village, and what we found was that there's actually very little speeding over the speed limit, even though it's perceived that the people are going really, really fast. There's a couple of outliers here and there. So my point is, as the traffic increases, just because of the neighborhood that we live in, the population of the city is increasing, there's more people driving through. We are continuing to look into it. We are assessing the situation on a yearly basis, essentially. The walkability study is going to give us more data, and hopefully we can address it in a holistic way across the village, because it's not just Cummings Lane, it's many streets that suffer with it. And we will continue to pay close attention to it to try to make our streets as safe as possible for the residents in the village. In terms of the parking signs, of no parking signs or encouraging to park in the right location, oftentimes we address it on a one-by-one basis. If there is a request that comes into the council, we always look into it closely. So I encourage you, if you live on Cummings Lane, to contact the village office, and the village office and the council will promptly respond. Thank you.
Great. Okay. For our next question, we'll start with Katya and go this way. Please discuss suggestions that VMA needs a more formal, organized effort to help neighbors in need. How would this differ from Chevy Chase at home?
So, our community is actually a very tight-knit community, and I've lived here for 12 years, and what I see over and over again is when there's a resident in need, oftentimes, most times, their neighbors will go and check on them and help them in as much as possible. We've had, over the years, lists of teenagers that are available to shovel elderly driveways, to help, during the snowstorms. And we continue to look into various options. So one of the tools that we use, as I mentioned, is the resident survey. So whenever suggestions come, we always look into it to see what can be done, and whether that's passed on to one of the many committees that we have, or a decision that is done by the council. We definitely take it seriously, and we try to encourage that cohesiveness of the community as much as possible.
Thank you. So I suggested in my candidate statement that we try to develop some kind of mechanism within the village to assist people who either are elderly and unable to handle things for themselves in an ideal way, who need help with snow shoveling, or who are injured and unable to deal with things. The community has developed a system of block captains, which I think is a very positive development, and one that I think lends the possibility of having people right on your block or right very close to you, someone you can call when you need help, and they can contact teenagers in the neighborhood or other residents who would be willing to help, people who may volunteer for this just to be on in a kind of an emergency call list. Similarly, I think with snow shoveling, I think that's a real issue, particularly for elderly people, and I think that would not be a bad system for dealing with this. I think the great virtue of this community, Chevy Chase at Home, is simply that it's right in your neighborhood with people that you know, and you can get an immediate response, and I think that's the great virtue of it. So, okay.
As founding members and longtime supporters of Chevy Chase at Home, they provide a licensing service. People who are vetted to drive people, who repair people are vetted, and that's something that I think is more appropriate for that to be done on a wider scale. And they've increased the community that they will provide services to. Like Katya in our neighborhood, we are very lucky that we have neighbors who help us. I mean, I can't shovel snow, and yet our walks are always cleared. There are always kids coming through the neighborhood looking for jobs at snow shoveling time. Not always the best, but they kids, they do come through. And we have a situation right now where, unfortunately, our neighbors, both of them are in a real crisis situation, and everybody is helping. The neighbors are taking food over. They are taking them for rides. And I think it's harder to organize a community to do that, but I think it is easy and is happening for neighbors. Done.
Great, this time we'll start with Peter, go to Richard, and
Okay.
Katya, mixing it up.
Okay.
Okay. Given the door handle activity on cars and the armed robbery at the pharmacy, does VMA need more public safety measures?
Yes, I think at least for some kind of interim period to kind of create a sense of deterrence and safety for residents. There have been episodes of minor crimes various times in the past, but most of the time we have not really suffered from this. So the fact that we're having kind of a mini crime wave now, I think suggests that we should be doing something that that might put a brake on the incentive to commit a crime in this area for the time being, and as our area moves out of public notice, maybe we'll be able to do away with that, or to reduce that. The council provided for an increased budget for policing this year. Now, as I understand it, they have not assigned those funds to any actual activity or to any actual measure, but simply because of the events that you're describing, there's more money available, and I think that we should be using that. So, as I understand the current policing measures, we have 2 part-time Montgomery County police officers who work off-duty at times that are compatible with their schedules. And so they're not always predictable. And I think that if we could hire either private security guard, security agency, or other Montgomery County off-duty officers to come through on a regular basis, particularly late at night, I think that could be very positive. And I think that need not continue indefinitely, but for the time being, yes. Which way would you like me to pass the microphone?
So we've dealt with this question over and over. And the police that come, our officers say that because crime in our area is so random that you could hire 50 more police officers, and unless you have somebody on every street every night, you probably aren't going to catch anyone. And we have gone to them over and over trying to get a recommendation of where they think we could improve police protection. And they say the same thing over and over, that it just, because it is so random, it really means having somebody there right as it's happening. We have put in extra money for the police this year because, like the special police we used last year to track speeding, stop sign running, that we have thought that was fairly effective. And we want to keep that program in place on an as-needed basis. Done.
Thank you. So every time that anything happens in the village that is unfortunate, whether it's breaking into cars or the awful incident at the pharmacy, we engage with the police officers, we get their recommendations, and act on it. So for the car break-ins, unfortunately, what we keep hearing over and over again is that the most effective way of addressing that is to just lock your cars. We've all heard that many times, and we keep hearing it from the police officers. The pharmacy incident, we're told, is kind of thankfully a one-off bad incident that hopefully will not occur in the future. Of course, there's no way of seeing the future, but at least according to the police officers, it seems like they don't see that this is any kind of a wave. It just happened once, and hopefully won't happen again in the future. So we do have the 2 police officers that work usually at night when they're off duty, and we have considered every year to potentially increase the number of hours that they work. But it is a balance between the financial situation of the village and what service we get. So as Richard said, what we are told is that we need exponentially more hours to make any sort of a dent in actually having a police officer present at the time of any incident. And we pay each police officer $65 an hour. So that adds up fast. Potentially, other things we could look at is install cameras at the entrances of streets so that if an incident does happen, we can track them. And that's something I definitely would be supportive of looking into for the council coming up.
Great. At this point, I'm going to open it up to the community for any follow-up questions.
We had one that came into the election committee, and Katya, you just opened it up. Would each of you support installing high-resolution, not the cheap ones, but the high-resolution security cameras at key locations here in the village, things that would actually identify a license plate?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, how much would that cost, and do you think it would raise privacy issues for residents?
Is it my turn to start?
Yes, go ahead and we'll
We have looked at it, and we've gotten really negative feedback from residents who say it is just such a privacy issue. Now, we don't know whether that's 3 people who really, really care, but it is something that we'll put in the survey so that we can actually get an idea of whether or not people support it. It seems to me on the surface that it would be a very effective way. I mean, we usually know sort of what time cars are broken into, and so it would be easy, although I don't understand cameras, but it sounds like it would be easy to, within a fairly strict period of time, actually check license plates. The police said that most often the cars that arrive, that do the checking of cars, are stolen. And so there's a very limited, it's limited on how much you're going to get for your money. But it's not dead yet.
Thank you.
I think, is Katya, or you, but go ahead,
Peter
Peter.
and Katya.
Yeah, well, I-
We'll reverse it.
Okay. Well, personally, I think the use of cameras might be a helpful solution. I don't know if it's a complete solution by any means. And one proviso that I'd like to put on it is that we control the cameras rather than Montgomery County Police. I think, one of the issues that that arises has to do with people working in the area who are not citizens and who may have questionable immigration status. I don't want the cameras to become an opportunity for Montgomery County Police to enforce, or for ICE to use those pictures to enforce against them. But yeah, I think that there's a possibility, as long as we control it, that this could be part of an integrated scheme to try to reduce the probability of crime. And I think that reducing the probability, not necessarily catching the person in the act, is the real issue. So if there are police on the street, indeed if there are people on the street, it reduces the incentive, the opportunity, it changes the cost-benefit equation for a potential criminal in contemplating whether or not to commit a crime. And so I think that actually catching people in the act is very difficult. Having people on the street is nevertheless useful. As far as cameras go, I think that they can be a supplement as long as, the issues of privacy are mitigated in part by having us in control of the cameras and not the police.
Thank you. So as I already said, I would be in support of high-resolution cameras to try to mitigate this because it is a very cost-effective alternative to just having people on the ground. But that said, that would only happen if the responses to the residents from the resident survey were of actual residents who maybe live around the key locations that would be listed in the survey, would be in support of that. So it has to be a balance of what the residents actually would like to see, and not just my own personal opinion.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
Can there be follow-up?
Please, go ahead, Susan.
I'm wondering about what neighborhood watch is. You come across some neighborhoods that have big signs that say neighborhood watch, and I'm not sure what that means and whether that's something we could potentially look into.
I think it's a formal program, and that it involves the police, and the police do training. I think that there has to be enough volunteers in order to staff such a program. And I'm happy to report I'm speaking from mostly ignorance, but that's been my understanding of it, is that it's police trained, whatever.
So it's something that could be looked into as another.
We've done that, not in the last 4 years, but I think maybe 6 or 8 years ago we went through and we're trying to find volunteers to go through the training, and there wasn't overwhelming response. In fact, there was hardly a response. It's a good idea if somebody else does it.
Anyone else on that?
I think it's worthwhile to look into various solutions every once in a while. So if we haven't looked into it in a number of years, it's definitely worthwhile to bring it up again and see if it gets any more traction this time around. So definitely a good idea.
Let me just say one thing. I think that there are issues with having a neighborhood watch. There's an issue that somebody could get seriously hurt in doing this. And there's also the possibility that somebody may commit an illegal act in the course of trying to support their community. And I think those are both significant concerns. I would not rule it out. I don't know enough about the program really to say, but I would be very concerned about the program.
People have guns or something?
I don't really know.
Oh.
I don't really know what they do.
Okay,
There's a question in the back.
now, Yeah, okay, so we have a follow-up specifically related to the last question. Is that what yours is as well?
I would say so.
Okay, go ahead.
Do any of the neighboring towns have either cameras or neighborhood watch?
Okay, we'll actually start with Katya this time. We go this way.
Maybe section 5, I'm sorry, I know.
I do not
we're
believe so. I do not believe so, but I'm not 100% certain. Do you know?
I don't believe that they do. I haven't seen any signs
Yeah.
posted. And in other areas, I have seen signs posted indicating that there's a neighborhood watch program in effect. I haven't seen that anywhere in our immediate vicinity. And I haven't heard about any such thing. So I suspect not, but I don't truly know.
But I can tell you that before we make any decisions on the council, we generally solicit feedback from the surrounding villages as well, so we can make a decision that is based on their experience if they are using it, and we can consider all of the pros and cons of making a change.
All right, you made my point, but I was going to make it a follow-up.
Did you want to say something on this?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Lauren.
This is a follow-up that is sort of a segue to another follow-up of what you were just talking about, but I am one of the residents that is pretty strongly opposed to cameras. And I like the comment that you made about opening up more avenues for robust community conversation around important issues, and I do very much appreciate the survey, though I think a survey sometimes doesn't get at the meat of an issue. It's more of like a tally, or who happened to sort of weigh in at that moment. And I'm just curious if we could hear a little bit more from each of you about other kinds of avenues for soliciting that more robust community conversation around these key issues.
Okay, should I start?
Yes, we'll go this way.
So, as you know, we do the monthly meetings that are open to all residents, and we really encourage all the residents to attend. A lot of times we don't get a lot of residents to come out and actually voice what they're concerned about. But if anything is on the agenda that is of particular interest to you, please do come and encourage all of your neighbors to come as well. There's always an open period in the beginning of the meeting and at the end where any opinion can be voiced. We send out the agendas prior to the meeting and the meeting minutes afterwards. What this council, the current council that's sitting now, that has implemented is the recorded meetings are always posted, so even if you can't come and meeting minutes don't provide enough information, you can actually hear to what was discussed, so that nothing is done, it's not a secret, right? So if there's interest, it is available currently today to hear the conversation. We have a lot of discussion via email, so if there is any concerns, right, residents oftentimes email us, and the council does discuss things in the off, kind of between the meeting timeframes, so that's another avenue. And any major decisions that are up for a decision, first of all, we usually discuss it for multiple months, so it's not a one and done opportunity. And we do try to raise awareness as much as possible that this decision is coming up, please come and participate.
Well, I think this is a serious issue for the community. I think that reaching a consensus, reaching a community understanding of all of the complexities of an issue is not something that happens instantaneously. It happens over a period of time, often in conversation with others, often with the benefit of the information and advice of people who are well informed on an issue, perhaps professionally knowledgeable in the area. And to me, that suggests that doing this in the context of a council meeting is often too short and too limiting a process. For example, with the 5G issue, the telecommunications issue, it turned out, that is both legally a very complicated issue and technically a very complicated issue. And I think it was difficult for anyone in the community to really understand what was going on simply from the presence in the agenda, in the emails, that the council was going to be talking about this. This is something that needed a higher level of community conversation, information, and learning to really understand what was going on. And ultimately, some of us in the community organized a meeting that involved several lawyers, that involved technical experts, and I think that enhanced the level of information considerably. I think there are a number of areas in which community meetings are very important, and we should find either a meeting at Olympia Coffee Shop just for everyone to talk about an issue, or here in the village office, or something where a higher level of conversation can take place.
I don't know what to start to address after all of that, whether it be 5G, Olympia Coffee Shop, or what work that the council does already. Just the walkability study, which we've talked about, is going to take the same path that we did with the building codes, which is that we are going to collect information from experts, as we've done in the past, that we've sent out surveys to the residents, we've held public hearings all along the process, we've presented some ideas on what ordinances we would pass. We get to the last stage of where we've held hearings and people come in and say, nobody told me that we were doing this. I think I should have been told. So some efforts, regardless, fall short. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying. I'm not saying that we should let up. It's important, and I personally think that through the newsletter, through publishing our agenda, through publishing results of the survey, that we've made a lot of ground in making the whole operation of the village more visible and more open to people, to what the council is doing.
Great. We'll take another written question. Can we look into information organizing a composting program for our community? Starting with
I'm sorry, what program?
composting?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, we have. I am excited about that. We've had a couple of people who have come, and even we had we had 2 companies come to one of our meetings to talk about how they handle community-wide composting and how often they pick it up and what processing they do. We're back to surveys. I don't know how many people are interested in it. I mean, there are rules and what you can put in. So it takes a certain amount of commitment on the part of the resident. As I recall, there is a monthly or weekly charge. But the council, I thought, was agreeable to either picking up some or all of that cost in order to get such a program going here. And because, well, I don't know how to say this, but we've had a lot on the plate, and it just hasn't been followed up. But we're interested in it. We need somebody to tackle it. So if any of you are interested and would like to help get us into composting, I would applaud it.
Well, I certainly think composting is a positive thing and something that, I think as a community we should be looking at. In general, I think that communities are increasingly moving towards ways of reducing their carbon footprint, of being more environmentally friendly, I think composting is part of that. I think it's a really positive direction. I would support not only composting, but exploring other environmentally friendly directions that the council can go, or that the community can go, I should say.
So the composting question came up as a result of the survey, as Richard said. And we did look into options and have heard from various companies. And the council has come to an agreement that we would support that. But again, as Richard said, we simply need to move it forward at this point. So if re-elected, I would be happy to make sure that it actually does, because we had a surprising amount of positive feedback on that issue from the last survey.
Okay, so we actually have 2 additional questions I just noticed on composting. So continuing the composting questions, we'll do a second round of these, and I'll just ask both of them, and if you could respond to these 2 questions, and Peter, you'll go first.
Okay.
The first is, and it's very similar to the last one, would you support composting provided by the village or at least organized by a collective contract? That's the first one. And the second is, many municipalities have begun supporting composting. Are you supportive of integrating composting services into our waste management contracts? So these are quite similar questions.
I'm sorry, the first question was whether I would support having the village be involved in
Providing
organizing.
for it or organizing a collective contract. And it sounds like the second is essentially the same, but whether we would consider a waste management contract. So it's a contract.
I think composting is something that has positive environmental benefits, and I think in general our community should be moving in that general direction. And my sense is that if the community organizes it, if the village organizes it, we'll get greater participation. It'll happen on a more regular basis. Composting equipment, the yard bins that are involved, instructions, for example, could be made available. And yeah, I think that there would be a higher level of participation. In terms of whether it should be integrated into a community contract, I think that in part depends on the cost of doing so. And we all have gardens, most of us have gardens, and composting produces dirt, and it might be something that people want to use in their own yards rather than shipping off to some unknown location, but I'd certainly be open to exploring it, yes.
I'm getting lost. The waste management was not interested, by the way, in including that in the trash pickup, because it's a very different sort of organization. The people that actually compost, the ones that came here, which is my only information, it seems to me, if I recall, said that they would return dirt back to the people who composted. Oh, by the way.
I think one of the companies did.
One of the companies said. I don't know what else to say other than it's of great interest, and we're looking for somebody, well, we on the council can do it, but it would be nice to have somebody volunteer to get research, get companies that would help us move it along faster. Did you already say? I'm so confused
I
about
didn't
who's
speak on
talking and
it
who's...
yet, specifically for these 2 questions, but I already said I would support it because the
Yeah.
residents requested.
I think
I
we've
wanted to
said
give it a little
enough.
more time because I noted that we had 3 questions on it specifically.
Right.
Anything else regarding composting you wanted to raise?
I hope the food that's not even here today gets composted.
Actually, we brought
We're taking
containers.
favors.
Yeah, we brought containers to take it to homes of people who could not come last night. And so we're going to try and distribute some of it. Just, oh, by the way.
So looping back to that neighbor conversation, those who need help, we try to actually distribute it to them.
Great. We do have a written environmental question.
Again, this is not from the election committee, but came to the election committee. There's been a lot in the news lately about herbicides like Roundup, glyphosate, I don't know if I said that right, not only killing the monarch butterflies, bees, and pollinators, but also causing cancer in people. Apparently, there were 2 recent big court decisions on that. These chemicals don't go away. They are sprayed on crops. They don't even, now they even show up in our Cheerios. It is not good for our kids or our pets to have this stuff sprayed on our lawns. What would you do as a council member to encourage village residents to hire only lawn care companies that do not use these toxic chemicals? Interesting question.
Yes. I don't know whether we've made that a condition for the people that do our landscaping. Do you know? Yeah, you who are leaving us.
I believe there are county regulations related to what can and cannot be used,
Yeah.
but the village itself does not have anything above and beyond the county.
Okay.
Speaking as a resident, can I just expand that question to include the mosquito spraying that's killing all the bees for the gardeners in the neighborhood?
Interesting.
I didn't know. I mean, yes, they come through. We don't, I think we, on our block, have one family that's using it. Are there herbal sprays that are effective?
They're not effective.
Pardon?
They're not as effective,
They're not
but
as
Okay.
they're
I
also
saw
not as effective
somebody-
at killing
not
people.
commercial herbal companies that I know of yet. Although
So-
that would be a good idea for a business.
I saw Grace Novak at the flower store where we were buying plants, and she has all of these chrysanthemums because they repel mosquitoes. I just passed that on for those of you who don't know that and want to walk around with a, with a bowl of
Yeah.
yes, a canopy. I'm sorry.
No.
I didn't take it serious.
Yeah. Really, it's a question that's kind of outside my area of knowledge, such as it is. I agree with Richard about the issue of chrysanthemums, or what I know about is
Marigolds?
geraniums.
Is it marigolds also?
I think marigolds and marigolds. Okay. So for a while, my neighbor was planting marigolds all around his big backyard garden, and so I started doing it too. And I would say it reduced the population of bugs visiting my garden by at least 5%.
Of bugs in general, or mosquitoes?
I'm joking. I have no idea, but I'm sure it did something. I just don't know.
Vegetable gardens plant marigolds
Right.
all around.
Yeah. Right.
Pests out.
Right.
All sorts.
And
Well, I support that in lieu of Roundup. Yes,
But the county did recently pass some laws
about not
about toxic
right.
lawn care
Right.
and stuff. I'm not sure.
Content, you wanna chime
The
in?
only thing I can add is that, we do, certain issues are purview, we can make decisions on certain issues and actually have the right to do so within the village. This is not one of those, we can't possibly enforce that type of a thing, so marigolds would be great.
Right. And I
Flowers
think
as well.
I think that's also, I know this isn't a question, but I'd like to add some information. I think it is also true of accessory buildings. That's a zoning issue.
Yes.
And we are prohibited from zoning we aren't able to enact any law regarding zoning. And
Right.
so but we still have a responsibility to let the county council know what our feelings are about those, and it always helps to get feedback from the residents.
What are accessory buildings?
This is
A garage?
Garage, yeah.
But I think
no,
that
it's
what
more
they're
than that. It's more than that.
guest house is what they're looking at is intensive of people building resident type buildings.
Actually, it's a good segue into this question. Do current VMA building codes take care of the issue of small accessory buildings?
Well,
Yes, they, in terms of the size and setbacks of how far they have to be from the property line. there is, they have to get a permit to put them in, and that they're subject to setback issues.
Right.
Jesus, Matt, tell me, is that right?
Yes. Are we talking about the county's
No, I
proposal?
think
or-
these are the storage sheds, I believe is what they're referring to.
The question is, do the VMA building codes
VMA
take
build-
care of, I guess, take into account the issue of small accessory buildings?
Yeah,
It's part of our building codes, we
I
do.
see. I don't know the
You
answer to
can
that.
trust me on that.
I do trust you on it. I wanted to say, it is true, I think, that, there's no question about it, that it's a zoning issue. The county controls zoning. For whatever reason, historically, VMA doesn't have the authority to control zoning issues. That's not part of our grant of authority from the state. However, I do think it's worth exploring, talking to legal counsel about what, if any, options it does provide for us. If there's any direction that we can go to try to reduce the impact on our community in particular. I think that depends on knowing something about what the community wants to do, and I think then it requires some legal expertise. But I think in general, it's exactly right that we do not have zoning authority, and it is a zoning question.
The only thing I'll add is that our legal counsel that is present at all the council meetings is updating us on the progress of the ordinances that are going through the county, so we are informed on that, and if there's any thing that we can implement, it will be recommended to us and be brought to our attention, and we'll follow the standard process, getting that approved.
I'd like to make another statement about 5G. Can we just do that? No.
Hold on. We have another question from the residents, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Well, I'm wondering if there is any limit to the size of the village council. And it seems like you have a lot of things on your plate and need help. And would it be possible to have more people on the council, elect all of you?
Well, the charter, right now, which the charter is the organizing document for our village, limits the council to 5 members. But the council can appoint other people, consultants, etc. But the actual voting in of representatives is limited to 5 members. So we could change the charter. But I would have to say that how many years that we have hunted for somebody to run. I mean, we seem to go in streaks of where you've got people that really want to come, and then all of a sudden there's a drought, and somebody is leaving the council, and you look and you can't find some. I would be very cautious about raising the number of members. It would be useful because of finding people who will serve. Okay, that's my opinion.
Peter?
Well, I guess one thing is it's useful to have an odd number
Yeah,
as a.
you could have 7.
Right, well, you could go to 7. The more that you get, the more difficult it becomes to reach agreements, and the more opportunity there is for obstruction, but there's also more resources for doing it, for working on various projects. So I have to admit it's a question I haven't really considered carefully, and I prefer not to say how I feel about it without having given it more thought.
I agree with Richard in the sense that, yes, it would be a charter change, so it would take a bit of time to even make it. I would be hesitant about making the change because we do seem to periodically really struggle with finding enough people to run for the existing 5 positions. So if we extended that number beyond that, it would be even harder to find enough folks. It's a fairly small village that we live in, right? Only 330 homes. So I think that's probably part of the reason why occasionally we struggle with finding
It would be, yeah, and we always are begging for volunteers for committees, I just want to say.
So what would you think about having a environmental conservation committee that could look into Roundup,
I think it's,
composting?
right, I think it would be
utilizing
a
some of the
great
regional
idea.
Solar facilities.
Right. Boy, that's a pretty broad, but I think that, right, I think it would, we would really support something like that, both budgetarily, if we can get volunteers, I think, I'd vote for it.
I would too.
And so would I.
There you go. You're hired.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. We actually have had, again, coming from various people in the community, a number of questions that go to exactly this issue. So I hope the council, whoever is elected, will pursue this. Here, I'm just going to read these to you. What can the village do? How can the village do more to protect local ecology and wildlife? Apparently somebody saw a wild turkey 2 weeks ago, which is a new visitor for us.
The alcohol, the liquor, or the?
Can the village prohibit developers from taking down big trees like Tacoma Park does? We have a tree city designation, but there's no restriction on a developer clear cutting a lot, and of course that's been a real issue for a lot of neighbors, because then you get erosion and the water runoff problems and all kinds of things. So there's a couple questions about trees. Would you as a council member consider a prohibition on developers taking down big trees?
Katya, do you want to go first?
I'd like to actually hear from Richard first, because I believe that has been discussed in the past.
We don't have
It's in
a
the history of it, I think
program
would be beneficial.
to control private property trees, and we've tried that at least 3 times to see if we could put in something, but it gets so complicated, and I can tell you this, it's not popular. It's my property. If I want to cut the trees down, I'll cut them down. And so it really gets into property rights, and it's a very difficult. I think the village of Chevy Chase has a program where they don't prohibit, but they have 2 tree supervisors or something that go out and see how the tree is and see if they can't convince the owner to either make a different building plan so the tree doesn't have to be taken out, or that then they require, if they want to take the tree out, that another tree be planted. But it requires a lot of supervision.
I think the question here was specifically not about current residents, but developers, prohibiting developers
Well,
from clear cutting.
but they own the property.
I see.
It's the same.
Right, and if somebody wants to sell their property to a developer,
Yeah.
not being able to cut down a tree would clearly reduce the price at which it could be sold, and the person selling it would be opposed to that at that particular moment in that person's life, I suppose. So I am aware that this is something that the village has dealt with in the past, and it got a good deal of opposition. And I would love to see controls on something like this, but it seems as if at least as of a couple of years ago, this was not something that was possible politically. That there was just a lot of resident opposition to it. I think it's a great idea, and I think that the town of Chevy Chase actually does have, requires a permit to take down a tree.
that may
Yeah.
be true, and
Yeah.
but they also have had, well, I don't know. They've had a lot of problems with it, is
Yeah,
my
exactly.
understanding. And it's required a lot of time because people go to the council to fight. Anyway,
Yeah. Right.
I don't know if I have anything new to add to what's just been said on that. We've looked into it. It would have been, I mean, if the residents don't necessarily want it in their majority to have that kind of optionality, then I'm not sure we should proceed with something like that.
can we take a small break for those of us who are old?
Certainly. Absolutely.
Have desserts.
Snack, drink,
Second
something.
course, yeah.
5-minute break. We are calling our forum back to order, please.
Oh, God.
We thank our candidates for their stamina, determination, and willingness to serve this afternoon.
This is the
Thank
moment
you.
at which I could faint.
Just getting one more chocolate. Okay. All right. So these are written questions that came in. And we'll start with 5G, as you suggested, Richard. What are the other local villages doing about the 5G issues? Do they have any protections or restrictions that VMA does not have in our new ordinance? And additionally, does it make sense to have a coordinated set of provisions for the town of Chevy Chase, Martin's Addition, sections 3 and 5, and all the local jurisdictions, so the companies who want to implement 5G networks can't play us off against each other?
You want me to start?
Katya can go first. We'll go this way.
Sorry, Richard.
No, I was thinking it was Bridget.
All right, so with the 5G issue, as in November of last year, the FCC ruled that municipalities have to pass an ordinance to try to regulate the installation of small cell antennas before April 15th, which effectively meant March 15th because we need 30-day period before the ordinance becomes effective. And in that short time frame, the council worked really hard to pass the best possible ordinance to put ourselves in a position to regulate the installation of small cell antennas. Once we have the ordinance in place, we can make further changes to it later when we get more information, and that's really the intent of it, that it addresses the installation issues up front, but we have full expectation that more changes will be made to it down the road. We did not make the decision in a vacuum. We obviously consulted with our legal counsel, who has drafted this ordinance based on the information from the Organization of Cities and the Maryland Municipal League. And all of the surrounding villages have implemented a very, very similar ordinance to us. It's not verbatim the same, but it's probably 99% similar, and ours is the most restrictive of them all. So the plan is to have ordinances in place and act together, and hopefully develop a lobbying group that will go to the county where those decisions can actually be made on a larger scale to protect the interests of residents and not the cell antenna installers and communications companies.
Okay.
You can have my 5 seconds.
Have what?
She cedes her 5 seconds.
No. Cede them to me, please.
You can
Great.
split them halfway.
Okay. Great. So, I think this is an issue where I think my discussion earlier about the need for better communication is important, because at some point after we discovered that this issue was on the table, my wife and I started sending emails about it. We started talking to people around in different communities, and it turned out that almost nobody in the village had any idea that any of this was happening. So you may have been working on it for a really long time, and I don't doubt that at all, but nobody in the community knew about it. I do want to say that, yes, some of the communities in our immediate vicinity have adopted closely similar ordinances. My understanding is that all of them have the same legal counsel, and that played a big role in getting ordinances that are very closely similar. However, it is true that there are other communities, such as Tacoma Park and Gaithersburg, that passed very, very different ordinances that were much more protective, and indeed, this has become something of a national movement across the country in the wake of the FCC's order. And many of those ordinances are in fact much more protective. Had we known about this earlier, we could have suggested many things that could in fact they could have been implemented had we decided to take the few necessary steps that were necessary to do that. But that was not to be.
If you go back and look at the newsletters, it seems to me that in October, information was sent out and maybe put on the council agenda. In November, same thing. In December, same thing. In January, we proposed ordinance. We had public hearings in January and in February, and we had to pass it in February in order to
We had to
meet.
pass it in March to meet
No,
the
it was-
We passed it in February because otherwise we weren't gonna, because of where the council meeting fell
That's right.
in March, we wouldn't get to the 30 days. So I feel that we've been pretty open about that issue. And as you said, Ron has been involved, our legal counsel, been involved with 12 other communities that he has met with the Municipal League and a number of other experts in providing us guidance. We passed a hurried ordinance, and I'm sure that there are stronger ordinances out there, but our own legal counsel questions whether all of those are defensible. And he was trying to not put us in a position of where we could end up in a court case that would go to the Supreme Court and break the village financially. Done.
Can I respond?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Well, again, I would repeat, the fact that virtually nobody in the village knew that this was happening suggests to me that despite the efforts to notify people, something else needed to happen. It was not effective because nobody knew about it. As people became aware of it, a fair number of people became concerned about it, and had there been real meaningful knowledge of this sufficiently in advance, perhaps more could have happened. The issue that I believe was guiding Ron, our village's lawyer, in drafting the legislation that he did was concern about the threat in the FCC order to preempt local regulation. We have, become well aware that preemption is much less binding than the village's ordinance would suggest. There's much less likelihood of federal courts overriding village regulations than turns out to be the case. So I understand Ron's concern and the council's concern, but I think if a larger discussion had taken place, we would have found the information much earlier that made it clear that a higher level of protection to the village residents would indeed be possible and legal under precedents under the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals.
But I'd just like to point out again that it was in the October newsletter, it was on the agenda in November, December. I mean,
Additional.
and so I don't know at what point,
Richard, I think you're proving my case. If this is a major issue, and I think it is, that nobody knew about, and you went through all the normal methods of publicizing it, then something else needs to be developed.
well,
I would just
I'm
like to
not
add
going
one
there.
thing, in that in passing this ordinance, we were simply setting ourselves up to be in a better position to further expand the ordinance later. That was our intent from the beginning. We've said it repeatedly at the meetings, so the ship has not sailed. We're continuing to have this conversation, and we should have this conversation with the engagement of the community. So thank you for raising awareness of this issue. It will enable us to be in a better position down the road.
Okay, anything else about 5G?
Are there any other questions from our residents here today? Well, then I think we should.
Susan,
Would you? Yes.
Can I raise
Sure.
one question about communication, since this seems to be such a huge thing? And I may have raised it at a council meeting at one point. This business of the separation of the listservs, the emails, from the one that's
From
I always
constant
wanna call it
contact.
constant comment, but
Yes,
the official one and the unofficial neighborhood one. I don't remember what, there was a big brouhaha months ago going around on the listserv about something, with a few neighbors weighing in very angrily about whatever. That you guys did not really, I kept wishing you guys were gonna respond to this and say what was happening, but it wasn't on your constant I don't understand
Right,
the difference, and I
right.
think that's maybe where some of the breakdown occurs.
the
That goes
listserv,
round and round among the
right.
you know, the residents, but you, I don't know if you even see it, but you don't respond
Right.
on that listserv.
The listserv is owned by Bill Lebovich and is totally private, and he can control who is on it and what gets said on it.
And can you be on it?
Yes, but for a long time I wasn't allowed to say anything. I think Katya's off it
I've
altogether.
been off it for years because I was banned at some point, and I've
Well, this is
requested multiple
ridiculous.
times to be re-added. I've recently been re-added, I'm on it now, but I believe that there's some kind of a check put in place that before Richard and I can post anything, it actually individually has to be approved
By
for that
Bill.
specific post.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so Constant Contact is the official
Yeah.
information, and replying to things that show up on the listserv is just an endless fight. It just, you know, like it just go, and it doesn't represent our position. And so if we respond, it is to respond on what the council's actions have been in the constant contact. Now you've got me saying it. So,
Comment is not a bad.
yeah, I agree.
Maybe there's some way that a group of people could look at this whole thing.
Well, Marty was a part of,
We tried Facebook, and we got everyone incredibly
nobody's gonna-
angry about
nobody's
that.
gonna-
So,
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
and Marty was part of a group when this, I think it's known as the Troubles, when we had the Troubles, and because of the way the listserv was being used. But we, you know, it's private property, and so we have no, yeah. Go ahead, Marty.
It's really been a 10-year struggle. Josh Bowers is the guy who created the listservs, but he couldn't continue to maintain it, so it ended up being run by Bill Leibovich, who was at the time a council member. And there was a lot of censorship. I was
And
cen-
Jean.
And Jean.
Jean was part.
And I was censored among many other people on a lot of things. So, you know, I also got banned from the listserv, as did half a dozen other residents that I know. And so we did set up a group and tried to work something out, and really failed. And the issue still is, I think it goes back to the communication issue that I think you've all discussed today. constant contact is good, but it's one way. It tells us there is no forum in Martin's Editions where community residents can have a discussion amongst ourselves. We can't send stuff out in constant contact. Comment, whatever it is.
Right.
You were right, you were right.
And we need a listserv that is, number one, not, what's the word? I'm going to be very, very diplomatic here. Not censored arbitrarily. We need a listserv that is not just freewheeling, because then you get all kinds of spam and junk on it, and it's just all advertisements. So there does need to be a manager. Bill has provided, I think, a great community service by being the manager. That service, however, has not been unbiased and has not been as good a service as it could be to the village in terms of open discussions. Which brings us back to village meetings and other kinds of forums where people actually get together. You know, have a committee like the tree committee, right? Have a committee where you can actually sit down and hash out an issue for 6 months with everybody who's interested. And I think we perhaps should have a committee on how to set up a listserv that is really an unbiased forum for the neighborhood discussions.
Is there any reason why a separate listserv that actually was, you know, moderated for obscenities and, you know, racism and, you know, sort of the sort of obvious red flags that ran through the office as a part of the function of one of the folks here? I mean, so that it just became something that was actually a listserv that was managed by, of the village. You know, again.
I think that's what we need, but I think the problem is just community confusion. You know, people don't know which listserv they're on and which one they ought to be on, and where do you post?
Captains, you know, we have these welcome bags now,
Yeah,
right? So, I mean, in the welcome bags is how people are informed about the listserv that they should sign up to when they join the village. So we have now these, you know, mechanisms that are starting to be built and put in place that can be guidance or guideposts for folks.
A letter could go out and even be sent by mail, you know, to every household.
Right.
Here's the new communications.
So as the moderator for a moment, I'm going to actually pose this then as a question for the whole panel. Given the fact that we have identified that there's clearly a problem with communications, whether related to 5G or frankly any other issue, and I think the way Marty put it is actually very clear that the official communications really, or the unbiased communications, truly are one way. What, if elected, Peter, would you do to change this? And Katya and Richard, what would you do on the council to change this going forward?
I'm sorry, just a point of order. You're saying as a moderator that we have clearly decided that there's a communication.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I just want to be fair.
Questions have emerged regarding communications.
Thank you.
So, what would you all do to address this issue?
May I?
Yes, of course.
So I think, you know, having a real listserv for the community that goes both ways, that includes anybody who wants to be part of the conversation, who's a resident, I think is necessary. I think we have to do that. Beyond that, I think that there should be community forums when a significant issue, such as 5G, such as perhaps the accessory dwelling units, you know, the walkability study when it comes up, the police issue, there should be an opportunity outside of the formal structure of a council meeting, which provides a limited amount of time for conversation, for people to get together, either in the council office or anywhere, doesn't really matter, but, you know, anything that's convenient. Bring in 2 or 3 people perhaps who are knowledgeable on the issue, you know, maybe have our lawyer present. I know there's a cost to doing that, but, you know, in a way, I think concern about the lawyer's fees is an issue of being, what's the expression? Penny wise and pound foolish. I always get them confused. So, you know, I just think that there should be an environment in which we can learn from each other, in which we can, as a community, get expert advice, in which we can express our views, raise our questions, and do that together, whether you're on the council or not. I'm done. Thank you.
Well, I agree that there's always a way to improve what we already have. I think that the council today works really well, but looking into our communications methods is something that should happen periodically anyway. So I believe that we should look at it holistically. What are the opportunities that we have? Potentially setting up an alternate listserv, but that really should be thought through well. How is it managed? What are the goals? What sort of things are we allowing to post and not allowing to post? What are the expectations of the council in terms of response times, right? So maybe having a communications committee, which we've done in the past, and that's what Marty was referring to, do a similar study again and see if we can find a better solution at this time. In response to Peter's comment on residents getting together and sharing information and raising awareness of issues, there's nothing that prohibits it today. And I think that by organizing this sort of event for 5G issue, you've demonstrated that you found something that you care about and you've organized a meeting and it went really well and raised awareness, and that is fantastic. We should continue to do that as residents. There's nothing that the council necessarily needs to do to support that further, because it can happen at any time. So thank you.
Can I respond to that?
I think it's Richard's turn.
But he can respond. He
Okay.
can use my time.
1 minute, okay. So we did have a meeting about 5G. We invited a couple of lawyers who were experts in the area, and a variety of other people. I don't recall everybody at the moment. My family paid for the meeting room at the Lawton Center. We paid fees to the people who came. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that individual members of the community should finance things that are really of a community interest that the council really should be dealing with. So I think this requires some community activity. I don't think the burden should be on individuals.
Yeah.
It would not have happened had we not done that.
Richard?
I think we need to look again at what we're using for communication vehicles. And we've done it before. Do people read the newsletter? Do people read Constant Contact? What could we send out that would get people interested in what we, the council, are doing? I mean, as those of you who have come to council meetings, we end up with 2 people, 4 people, and so there isn't any demonstrated issue like that that helps. And I think we've gone a long way toward opening the meetings, of not only having people give comments at the beginning, but as we've gone through issues, we've asked for points of view. It's not Robert's Rules of Order, but I think it is, we've really tried to be more inclusive. We can keep trying, and maybe a committee to look at it again would be useful. Lori? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that.
Just, maybe I'm overly optimistic right now, but it seems like the days of rampant animosity within the village have largely passed. And I'm just wondering if it might be worth, since we already have a village listserv, if it might be worth reaching out to Bill and saying that we'd like to transform it, and perhaps even compensating him if we're thinking about moving it to a function for the office, and trying to work within what we already have, and just coming up with new guidelines for it. So I just would like your opinion on that, because it seems, I don't know, I feel like, I don't even know Bill very well, but I feel like he's been maligned a little bit here, and maybe I haven't always been able to post. I'm not sure if something I write's not posted. I think I typed in the wrong address, but maybe that wasn't the case. But to me, it would be worth not reinventing all of these things.
Right.
Trying to reach out. Would that be something?
Right. It may be Peter is the neutral person to do that, because I know what list I'm on, and Katya is pretty sure Tiffany is not allowed to post. Arthur can. Can you post? Okay, Susan can post. And so we'd have to find somebody who is sort of neutral. It's going to take probably a Jean friend who would like to see change.
Oh, what?
No, don't.
Okay.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
It might be a good start, though, just to recognize his contribution to the community that
Right.
he has run this list.
Right, right.
No, I wouldn't do it, and that was the problem. When we met, do you remember, it was, everybody said, oh my God, we need another listserv, and we ought to do it, and nobody, and there was a group of 8 of us, there was not one person who said that they would manage the listserv. I mean, it's a lot of work.
Isn't
I guess. I've never done it, but Josh Bauer, who started it, said, you know, you've got to register new people, you have to scan the messages that are coming through, try to stop people who are selling commercially from getting on. I mean, it's, anyway, my 30 seconds are up.
Are there any other comments? If not, we should go to 3-minute closing comments.
We have one additional question.
One more question?
One more question, yes. Martin's Edition seems to have plenty of revenue and reserve funds these days. What are your thoughts about reducing our local taxes? Richard?
Our local taxes are currently 0.0004. And so on $1 million house, it might be $60. We are keeping that in place, that low rate, so that if we have another bad year like we had with the recession, that we already have the tax in place to raise it if we need to do that. We have about 5, the bulk of our income comes from state tax returns to the community. So we get 17% of the money our residents pay to the state of Maryland comes back to our village as a rebate. And the state has said to us that there are 5 residents in Martin's Additions who account for like 62% of our money. And so when there is a recession and their profits go down, ours go down. And that's big contributions. I'm done.
Can I go next, since we've gone
Yeah.
that way already? So this past year, we've actually voted to reduce the property tax rate down to 0.00004, very low rate. So it was increased during the major recession that we had in 2008, 2009, or following that recession, to try to compensate for the losses in the income tax that Richard talked about. And we have recouped the money that we needed to run the village and so much more. And so this year we've realized that we have plenty of reserves. We've accomplished a lot of major expensive projects already. We have reserves for the walkability study and still enough for the rainy day. And so we brought it back down to essentially 0 without fully eliminating it to allow us to raise it in the future in case of extreme situations where we need it for a short period of time.
And it does not get raised without a public hearing, just so you know. This is not a council decision. It is, the council puts it out for public hearing before it changes.
Peter?
I agree with what Richard and Katja are saying about the tax rates, and I guess what I would add to this is that I think there are times at which community spending is a really positive thing. And for example, we have a real issue with what I call a mini crime wave in our community. I think spending a little extra on police is not a bad thing. I think there were significant legal issues arising out of the 5G issue. I think spending a little extra money on lawyers might not be a bad thing. I think, you know, to have a real community conversation about that, we needed to have the lawyer present. And I know that costs money, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So, you know, I don't think our taxes are unduly burdensome at the local level. You know, maybe at the county level they are, but I don't. Excuse me, at the state level, I think they perhaps are more in the higher end of what state income taxes are. But I think I would be thinking about productive ways in which we can use bits and pieces of that money to make the community work better.
Great.
Closing statements?
Well, before the closing statements, I just want to make sure we didn't miss any questions. Any questions? Okay. Great, then we'll do 3-minute closing statements. We'll start with Richard and go this way, which is the opposite of how we did opening statements.
I didn't prepare anything, and so what I can say is that I'm really proud to have been on this council for the last 4 years, for the changes we've made in making the village more livable, to making the administration of the village more transparent, including contracts, that we have really, I believe, have moved the village into where it is likable again, where we've taken the division out, and there was a lot of it. I'd like to be elected again. Thank you.
I also did not prepare a closing statement. I'm not sure if Katja has.
No, I have not.
So I think we have consensus on this. If nothing else. I have never meant to dispute that the council has made strides forward over the past couple of years in enhancing the livability of the community. I do think there are a few issues I think that seem significant, and I think there are a few ideas out there that could contribute to moving the community forward. And that's what motivated me to run, and I still pretty much believe that. And I would like a chance to serve on the council, and so I ask for your vote also.
Thank you. I would just like to say in closing that I have really enjoyed volunteering my time over the last 4 years serving on the council, and we have an amazing, workable group of people on the council today. We don't always agree, but we're able to hear each other's opinions and come to a resolution in a peaceful way, move forward, no drama, in the best possible way for the residents, I believe. And I would like to continue serving the community, and I ask for your vote on May 9th. Thank you.
Can we give our candidates a round of applause?